9. Steve McNair. Former NFL quarterback Steve McNair rose to fame during the late 90s and enjoyed a successful 13-season career that lasted until his retirement in 2008 at the age of 35. He and his wife of 11 years, Michelle McNair, lived a seemingly idyllic life, with Steve splitting his time between the family's farm in Mississippi and a condo in Nashville that he rented. But unbeknownst to Michelle, Steve also had a 20-year-old mistress in Nashville named Sahel Jenny Kazemi. The two had met in early 2009 when Kazemi was working as a waitress. Steve spoiled the young woman with lavish vacations and gifts, including a Cadillac Escalade SUV. But it wasn't enough for Kazemi. She wanted to be the main woman in Steve's life, and she even told her friends and family that he planned to leave Michelle and marry her. In reality, though, McNair had no plans to leave his wife, and Kazemi's jealousy became an ongoing issue. She became increasingly mentally unstable over time, especially after she began to suspect McNair of seeing another mistress behind her back. At the same time, Kazemi felt like she was losing control over other things in her life. Her roommate had recently moved out, and she was struggling to afford the rent. And while McNair had provided the down payment for her Escalade, she was responsible for the monthly payments, adding further strain to her finances. Kazemi's situation worsened in July of 2009 when she was arrested for driving under the influence. McNair was in the passenger seat at the time and initially left the scene in a taxi. But later on, McNair bailed Kazemi out of jail. 2 days later, Kazemi shot McNair multiple times while he slept on his couch. And afterward, she ended her own life the same way. Sadly, McNair died suddenly, leaving behind his family without having prepared a last will and testament. As a result, his assets were frozen while his estate was being settled. In October of 2010, McNair's widow reportedly saw a Nashville judge and requested that some of the assets be unfrozen so she could cover the expenses for her and McNair's children. The judge agreed, awarding each of the 4 children $500,000. 8. Andres Escobar. Nicknamed the Gentleman, Colombian soccer player Andres Escobar played for several professional teams. He was playing for Colombia's national team when he was murdered after their participation in the 1994 FIFA World Cup. Throughout his career, Escobar dedicated a lot of energy toward improving his country's image. But ironically, he was blamed for tarnishing his country's image with his poor performance in the game, resulting in his team's elimination from the competition. Even more ironically, the team's loss is said to be the cause of Escobar's murder. The killing occurred 5 days after the team was eliminated, when he returned to Colombia instead of visiting relatives in Las Vegas. On the night of his death, Escobar went to a nightclub in Medellin with some friends. At some point, though, they split up. Escobar was in the parking lot alone at 3 a.m. when he was ambushed by a trio of men, 2 of whom were armed with handguns. They began arguing with the soccer star, then shot him 6 times with a .38 caliber pistol and fled the scene in a pickup truck. They left Escobar to bleed out on the pavement alone. By the time Escobar was found clinging to life and was rushed to the hospital, it was too late to save his life. He was declared dead within an hour of arriving at the emergency room. The day after Escobar's murder, authorities arrested a drug cartel bodyguard named Humberto Castro Munoz in connection with the crime. According to police, Castro had lost a lot of money that he had bet on the game due to the Colombian team's loss. He confessed to killing Escobar and was sentenced to 26 years in prison. However, he was released after serving about a decade due to good behavior and other reductions in his sentence. While Escobar's murder appeared to be retribution for the blame he suffered over his team's World Cup loss, he was still loved in the eyes of many, including the 120,000 people who attended his funeral. And in 2002, a statue was constructed in his honor in Medellin. 7. Sean Taylor. Sean Michael Maurice Taylor played 4 seasons with the NFL's Washington Redskins starting in the early 2000s. But his career and life were cut short in November of 2007 when he was shot dead inside his Miami home by intruders. On the night of his murder, Taylor went to investigate some noises he heard from elsewhere within his residence. He was shot in the leg, which severed his femoral artery, causing him to lose a massive amount of blood. Taylor then died at the hospital the following day. 4 days after the botched burglary, 4 male suspects were arrested in connection with the crime. A 5th suspect was charged several months later. According to police, more than one of the men confessed. They were all subsequently charged with second-degree murder, armed burglary, and home invasion with a firearm. The charges were eventually upgraded to first-degree murder. However, prosecutors declined to seek the death penalty due to the shooter's age at the time of Taylor's murder. This meant that the defendants faced a maximum sentence of life in prison without parole. In 2008, defendant Venja Hante took a plea deal in exchange for a 29-year prison sentence. He later tried to withdraw his plea, but records show that his original sentence remains in place with a projected release date in December of 2033. The alleged gunman, Eric Rivera Jr., claimed during his trial in 2013 that someone else pulled the trigger. He was found guilty of second-degree murder and armed burglary, which could have carried a life term, but the judge sentenced him to 57.5 years in prison. Defendant Jason Scott Mitchell was convicted of murder and sentenced to life, while Charles Wardlow received a 30-year prison sentence. The final defendant, Timmy Lee Brown, took a plea deal and received an 18-year sentence. 6. Denis Ten. Figure skater Denis Yurevich Ten was a 2-time world medalist and competed in the 2014 Olympics for the country of Kazakhstan. He also competed in and won several other international championships and was a 5-time national champion. But Ten's career came to an abrupt and unexpected end in his home city of Almaty in July of 2018. The 25-year-old was stabbed in the thigh by a pair of carjackers as they tried to steal his car mirrors, which were worth an estimated $68. The professional skater was rushed to the hospital, where he died from blood loss a few hours later. Police apprehended the suspects, aged 23 and 24 years old, the following day. They were both found guilty in early 2019 and were each sentenced to 18 years in a penal colony. 5. Lorenzen Wright. Professional basketball player Lorenzen Wright played in the NBA for 13 seasons starting in the late 1990s. During that time, he played for 5 different teams, including the Los Angeles Clippers, the Atlanta Hawks, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Sacramento Kings, and the Cleveland Cavaliers. While visiting a friend in his hometown of Memphis in July of 2010, Wright received a call from his ex-wife, Shara Wright, who demanded that Lorenzen return their son to her right away. Hours later, a 911 dispatcher received a call from a distressed male with gunshots in the background. But even then, the police did not immediately investigate. Lorenzen's mother, Marion, reported him missing. In the meantime, she grew suspicious of Shara, who casually claimed that her ex-husband was spending time with other women. At the same time, Shara told investigators that Lorenzen had criminal connections and that she last saw him with a man who was trying to sell drugs. She also claimed that men in trench coats had appeared on her doorstep looking for Lorenzen. His remains, riddled with gunshot wounds, were found on an isolated road in a wooded area. A homicide investigation soon went cold, and for the next 7 years, the circumstances surrounding Lorenzen's death remained a mystery. However, suspicions about Shara's possible involvement grew as she squandered a $1 million life insurance payout that was meant for the couple's 6 children. Finally, in 2017, police announced that they had found the murder weapon after someone began talking about their involvement in planning Lorenzen's death. Investigators started monitoring Shara's correspondence and found incriminating information, leading to her arrest later that year for murder. She pleaded guilty for her role in the crime and received a 30-year sentence. But by then, Shara had already served over 500 days in jail and faced as little as 7 more years. She could see freedom as early as 2026. Instead of harboring bitterness toward Shara, Lorenzen's mother thanked her for giving her 6 grandchildren and expressed her intentions to focus solely on them. 4. Vernon Forest. Over a 16-year period starting in 1992, American professional boxer Vernon Forest held multiple world championship titles. Late one night in July of 2019, he stopped at a gas station in Atlanta's Mechanicsville neighborhood and began adding air to one of his car tires. At a moment when he seemed to least expect it, Forest was robbed at gunpoint. As the thief fled the scene, Forest chased after him with a pistol and the two exchanged gunfire. Forest then stopped and talked to a second man, who pulled a gun and shot him at least 7 times from behind. The shooter and another person fled the scene in a red Pontiac sedan, leaving Forest to die from his injuries. He passed away when he was just 38 years old. Authorities later charged 25-year-old Jaquante Cruz, 20-year-old Demario Ware, and 30-year-old Charmin Sinkfield in connection with the pro boxer's murder. According to prosecutors, Sinkfield was the shooter, Ware was the robber, and Cruz was the getaway driver. All 3 defendants were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. 3. Dino Bravo. Nicknamed the Canadian Strongman, Italian-born professional wrestler Dino Bravo began his career in Montreal, Quebec during the 1970s. He won multiple awards over the next few decades, including the NWA Canadian Heavyweight Championship and the NWA Mid-Atlantic Tag Team Championship. He was also a 6-time title holder of the Canadian International Heavyweight Championship. And he likely would have gone on to win more if a violent tragedy hadn't cut his life short. In March of 1993, Bravo was found dead inside his home with 11 gunshot wounds to the head and torso. He was just 44 years old. To this day, the murder remains unsolved. Authorities believe that he was killed over his involvement in illegal cigarette smuggling. 2. Darren Williams. American pro football player Darren DeMarcus Williams played for the Denver Broncos during the 2005 to 2006 season. At around 2:10 a.m. on New Year's Day in 2007, he was murdered in a drive-by shooting in downtown Denver, Colorado. The incident occurred just 12 hours after the Broncos' final game of the season, when a vehicle pulled up next to Williams' rented Hummer limousine. He was on his way home from a New Year's Eve party with some friends when the gunfire broke out. The incident reportedly came on the heels of some type of argument at a nightclub between Crips gang members and other patrons, including Williams' teammate Brandon Marshall. According to an ESPN report, Marshall was one of the instigators in the altercation, which Williams was not a part of. Marshall was also the intended target of the bullets. Williams unfortunately paid the price for his teammate's role in the confrontation and died almost instantly from a single gunshot wound to the neck. The vehicle involved in the shooting was registered to 28-year-old Crips member Brian Hicks, who was already incarcerated at the time of the incident. Unfortunately, nobody has ever been brought to justice for the crime. This is despite the Rocky Mountain News claiming in 2008 that it had obtained a written confession from another gang member named Willie D. Clark, who allegedly admitted to being the shooter. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Hector Camacho. Born in Puerto Rico in 1962, champion boxer Hector Macho Camacho was known for his flamboyant style and his quickness in the ring. He competed professionally from 1980 to 2010. In 2011, Camacho was taking a friend to a bar in San Juan when 2 men approached his vehicle and fired 3 gunshots at him. Thankfully, though, he survived. He declined to file a police report and even assumed that the shooters had targeted him by accident, since, in his words, Everybody Loves Me. On a November evening the following year, Camacho was fatally shot in the jaw by someone in a passing SUV while sitting in a car along a highway in Bayaman. The bullet disrupted the blood flow to his brain. This eventually put his family in the painful position of having to choose whether or not to continue life support at the hospital. He died from a heart attack at 50 years old the day after his mother made the heartbreaking decision to discontinue life support. Camacho's murder remained unsolved until March of 2022, when 5 suspects were finally arrested nearly a decade after his death as part of a law enforcement initiative called Operation Knockout. 3 of the defendants, William Rodriguez, Luis Ayala Garcia, and Joshua Mendez Romero, were already serving federal prison sentences in Florida for unrelated crimes. They were extradited to Puerto Rico on the same morning that police arrested the 4th suspect, Jesus Naranjo Adorno. The 5th suspect, Juan Luis Figueroa Rivera, was already in prison in Puerto Rico for an unrelated case at the time of Adorno's arrest. In an unexpected twist, the cases against all 5 defendants were dropped in June of 2022. Just 3 months after their arrests. According to authorities, the charges were dismissed because the star witness against the men fled the island. They contacted law enforcement in Florida, where they believe the witness fled, but justice has yet to be brought against the perpetrators.
Number 8. Oscar Pistorius. In 2012, South African sprint runner Oscar Pistorius made history for being the first amputee to compete in Olympic track events. Nicknamed the Blade Runner, he was born without a fibula in both legs and underwent a double amputation below the knee at a young age. However, the athlete's swift rise to international stardom came crashing down just as quickly in early 2013, when his girlfriend, model Riva Steenkamp, was found shot to death at her home in Pretoria. Authorities quickly zeroed in on Pistorius, who claimed he shot Steenkamp through a locked bathroom door after mistaking her for an intruder. But investigators didn't buy his story, and he was charged with premeditated murder. Prosecutors accused Pistorius of deliberately shooting Steenkamp after she locked herself in the bathroom during an argument. He maintained his innocence throughout the trial and broke down in tears on the stand as he apologized to Steenkamp's family for what he claimed was an unintentional mistake. Not everyone was swayed by the disgraced athlete's waterworks, though, and some even alleged that he took acting lessons before the trial, which he denied. At one point, the defense attempted to argue that Pistorius suffered from an anxiety disorder that influenced his decisions on the night of the shooting. However, a team of court-appointed psychiatrists concluded that he didn't suffer from clinical anxiety. Pistorius was found not guilty of premeditated murder in 2014, but was convicted of the lesser charge of culpable homicide. He was later released from prison the following year on house arrest and probation. Unsatisfied with what seemed like a slap on the wrist, prosecutors fought the ruling, and in 2015, South Africa's top appeals court ruled that Pistorius was guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, but prosecutors once again condemned the outcome for being too lenient and took the matter back to court. In 2017, his sentence was increased to 15 years. Pistorius appealed the sentence but was denied. As of 2023, he's eligible for parole, but he remains behind bars for the time being. Number 7. Kevin Ware. 29-year-old Taylor Pomaski was last seen alive in April of 2021 at the Harris County, Texas home she shared with her boyfriend, 41-year-old former NFL player Kevin Ware Jr. Witnesses later reported seeing the couple fighting violently that night during a house party. Ware quickly became a person of interest to investigators, who arrested him several months after Pomaski went missing for not attending his bail hearings in an unrelated felony drug and gun case. He was reportedly uncooperative when authorities tried to question him about his girlfriend's disappearance. Pomaski's family suspected Ware of being involved, and so did her ex-boyfriend Eric Zuliger, who told ABC 13 that Pomaski had reached out to him for help shortly before she went missing. Zuliger also said that Ware had taken away Pomaski's cell phone weeks before she vanished, and that she was only able to communicate via email. The last time he saw the young woman, she seemed thin and appeared to have facial injuries. In December of 2021, 8 months after Pomaski went missing, her suspected remains were discovered. Several months later, they were positively identified as Pomaski. Then in mid-2022, Ware was indicted on charges of murder and tampering with a corpse. Prosecutors remain tight-lipped about most of the details about what they believe happened, but court documents allege that Ware fatally cut, strangled, and bludgeoned the victim. If convicted, he could serve 15 years to life behind bars. Number 6. Aaron Hernandez. It would be impossible to briefly cover the entire rap sheet of former New England Patriots player Aaron Hernandez, but we'll go over the highlights. In 2014, he was charged in connection with a drive-by shooting that killed a pair of men in Boston 2 years earlier. He was also accused of shooting his friend, Alexander Bradley, during a night out in early 2013. Bradley, who was an alleged witness to the 2012 double homicide, survived and refused to cooperate with authorities. Hernandez was subsequently charged with witness intimidation. Later on in 2013, several months after the Bradley shooting, Hernandez's pal, Odin Lloyd, was found shot to death just a mile away from Hernandez's house. Suspicion immediately fell upon the disgraced football player, and within days he was charged with first-degree murder and was subsequently dropped from the Patriots. Hernandez was officially convicted of Lloyd's murder in 2015. His motive remains unclear, although speculation suggests that Lloyd, who was dating the sister of Hernandez's fiancée, had discovered his friend's bisexuality, causing Hernandez to fear being outed. Another theory points towards Hernandez being angry at Lloyd for talking to his enemies at a nightclub. Hernandez was acquitted on charges relating to the double homicide and Bradley shooting, but it didn't really mean much since the murder conviction automatically landed him a life sentence without parole. However, just days later, he was found dead in his prison cell after taking his own life. On the wall, there were drawings made in blood of an unfinished pyramid, the all-seeing eye, and the word Illuminati. The words John 3:16 were written on Hernandez's forehead in blood. He left behind 3 bizarre rambling notes to his lawyer, fiancé, and daughter. In them, he discussed entering a timeless realm. A post-mortem study of Hernandez's brain revealed that he was suffering from a degenerative brain disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, which is often found in athletes who play high-impact sports. Researchers described it as the most severe case they'd ever seen, and it very well may have affected his destructive decision-making. Number 5. John Paul Sr. Dutch-American race car driver John Paul Sr. was a successful hedge fund manager with a Harvard degree before ever rising to fame in the world of motorsports during the 1960s and 70s. When he was unable to fund his new racing career on his own or through legitimate sponsors, he began trafficking drugs. In 1979, he was caught with over $10,000 cash and more than 1,500 pounds of marijuana. Paul pleaded guilty to a possession charge and was forced to pay a $32,000 fine as a result. He married 32-year-old Chalice Alfred Barnett the following year, but the marriage was short-lived. Barnett vanished off Key West in 1981, marking the first of 2 suspicious disappearances that Paul would be linked to. 2 years later, Paul was arrested for shooting Stephen Carson, a witness who'd been granted immunity in a federal drug case. Carson survived his injuries though, and Paul fled while out on bail. He was nabbed in Switzerland with a fraudulent passport 6 months later. After being extradited back to the US, Paul was convicted of racketeering and attempted first-degree murder, earning him 25 years behind bars. He unsuccessfully tried to escape prison in 1987 by spraying hot sauce and pine sol in a guard's face, who quickly recovered and forced Paul to surrender after firing 2 warning shots from his gun. Then in 2000, Paul's new partner, Colleen Wood, moved onto his boat, the Diamond Lady. She also vanished later that year, and Paul claimed she left on her own accord after a disagreement over money. In the 3 months following her disappearance, someone other than Colleen withdrew $38,000 from her bank account and used her credit cards. 2 women who were seen completing the transaction on surveillance footage claimed that a man had paid them a cut of the proceeds in exchange for pretending to be Colleen. Authorities have stated that they would like to question Paul about the case, but he vanished from Fort Lauderdale on the Diamond Lady in 2001, and they've been unable to track him down ever since. Number 4. Saleem Rasheed. Former NFL linebacker Saleem Rasheed played for the San Francisco 49ers and the Houston Texans between 2002 and 2006 before moving on to Canadian pro football. He worked as a high school teacher from 2009 to 2011. during which time he allegedly had inappropriate relations with 2 students. They were over the age of 18, but not legally able to consent due to a state law prohibiting intimacy between teachers and students. But before these illicit flings caught up with him, Rasheed was charged with food stamp fraud. He admitted to receiving over $5,000 in benefits while falsely claiming to be unemployed and was sentenced to 8 months in prison. The former pro athlete also pleaded guilty to falsely claiming he was married to a woman other than his wife on immigration forms. Federal records revealed that Rasheed married a woman named Hadam Benachu in Morocco in 2005. They moved to the U.S. in 2006 and had 2 children in 2007 and 2009. In the meantime, Rasheed had 2 kids with another woman in 2006 and 2008 and married her despite not being legally divorced from Benachu. His misconduct as a teacher finally caught up with him in 2013 when he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for his inappropriate relations with students. Number 3. Ed Belfour. Hockey player Ed Belfour logged 484 wins throughout his career, ranking him as the 5th best NHL goaltender of all time. People called him Crazy Eddie, and he apparently lived up to the nickname both on and off the ice. One night in early 2000, a woman he was with at a Dallas hotel called security and said that she was scared by Belfour's drunken behavior. Security guards escorted the woman out of the hotel and confronted Belfour, who allegedly slammed one employee's head into a wall and put him in a headlock. Hotel employees sprayed him with mace, but the struggle continued until police arrived. The authorities later claimed that Belfour offered them $1 billion to release him without charges after being taken into custody. He ended up paying a $3,000 fine for resisting arrest and apologized to the police, the hockey community, and his fans for the way he acted. Then in 2007, Belfour was arrested again, this time for disorderly intoxication and resisting arrest. He was also apprehended in 2020 for third-degree criminal mischief and alcohol intoxication in a public place. According to a police report from the 2020 arrest, he damaged property at a hotel in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and was under the influence of alcohol to a point he was a danger to himself and others. He ended up pleading guilty to the public intoxication charge and was ordered to pay $219 in fines and court fees. Number 2. Steve Durbano. During the 1970s, Steve Durbano gained a reputation for being one of the fiercest hockey players in the NHL, which unfortunately got him suspended and kicked off teams more than once. Known by the nicknames Wild Man and Mental Case, the Canadian-born defenseman was also notorious for his crazy behavior off the ice, which became especially noticeable after his hockey career ended in 1979. Durbano reportedly blew his savings on partying and drugs, and in 1981 he was arrested at the Toronto International Airport with nearly 500 grams of cocaine in his possession. He was convicted of smuggling cocaine 2 years later and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Around that time, Durbano admitted that he regularly used cocaine during his NHL career. Many speculated that he got involved in drug trafficking as a way to finance his habit, which by the time he went to prison, was costing him around $1,000 per week. He was released from prison after serving 2 years and managed to mostly stay out of trouble for the rest of the decade, minus a shoplifting charge he caught for stealing shirts. By the early 90s, Durbano was welfare dependent and barely making ends meet with his meager hockey pension of $300 per month. He started an escorting business as a way to pay the bills, but was arrested after trying to recruit an undercover cop into the trade. Durbano spent 3 more months behind bars. He then moved to Yellowknife, Canada, where he lived a somewhat calmer lifestyle than he was known for. However, he never stopped drinking, and eventually, all those years of abusing his body caught up with him. He ended up dying from liver cancer in 2002 at just 50 years old. Number 1. Bob Probert. Former Detroit Red Wings forward Bob Probert was already on thin ice with the NHL, no pun intended, when he was caught trying to smuggle drugs into Canada in 1989. By then, the 23-year-old had been to rehab for his drinking 5 times and saw disciplinary measures that banned him from 44 of the most recent season's games. He'd also been arrested several times for multiple reasons, including for driving while impaired and assaulting a police officer. Probert approached the border via the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel in a borrowed car with 3 passengers at around 5:15 a.m. After discovering that the vehicle was littered with empty beer cans and a liquor bottle, U.S. Customs agents searched the suspects and found a half-ounce of cocaine hidden in Probert's underwear, along with paraphernalia in his pocket. Probert was consequently charged with importing cocaine into the U.S., and he quickly became the first player in NHL history to be expelled for involvement with drugs. Until that point, only 3 other players had been kicked out of the organization, and they were booted for gambling. The NHL had given Probert numerous opportunities to clean up his act, but there's only so much someone can do to help a person who has no apparent desire to improve their life. In the words of former Red Wing coach Jacques Demers, who spoke with the New York Times shortly after Probert's expulsion, Bob Probert could have been 10 years from now a multi-millionaire and had it all, but it's not going to be, and I have no control over that.
Which of these tragedies stands out in your memory the most? And if you were a famous athlete, would you rather play football or soccer? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're at it, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you in the next one. Bye for now.